This is episode 66 with Stephen Goldstein.
Welcome to Spot On Insurance. Join us each week as we speak to insurance professionals, attorneys, regulators, and compliance specialists on topics ranging from improving your agency to staying on the right side of the law. Subscribe and stay informed on the effects of new trends and disruptive emerging technologies on your businesses and your industry.
Welcome to the Spot On Insurance Podcast. I'm Ted Tavares.
And I'm Arlene Tavares.
Stephen Goldstein is a global insurance executive with over 10 years of experience across the United States, Europe, and Asia in distribution, operations, audit, market entry, and corporate strategy. Stephen is the managing director for Pivot Ventures US, advising Insurtech startups on their sales strategies and go-to-market initiatives. In addition, Stephen is the weekly Insurtech author for Daily FinTech, a fintech trends and analysis blog with over 22,000 subscribers from across 130 countries. Stephen, welcome to Spot On Insurance.
Thanks for having me, Ted and Arlene. Great to be here.
So glad that you're here. Stephen, I would first of all like to chat with you a bit about, some of the exciting things that are happening in our industry. I know a lot of people cannot conceive that the insurance industry is actually exciting, but insurance kind of reaches every sector, every single state, city, country, and a bunch of us get to travel to some of the most beautiful places in the world. And I would love for you to share with our listeners how you joined the insurance industry and fintech and what you do with Insurtech and some of the places that it has allowed you to travel to.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Arlene. So I started my career in financial services back in 2006. I started as a financial advisor, and I was working for a independent financial advisory firm, which we had about $115 million under management. And I was the insurance and annuity kind of expert in the office, meaning that I would scan all the different offerings that were available, engage with all of our wholesalers, identify what were the great solutions that we could bring to our customers. It's a great time to be in the industry. 2006 was rocking and rolling in the market. Unfortunately, then 2008 happened with the crisis.
Mm-hmm.
That 115 million of assets under management turned into about 75 million overnight. We had a lot of customers that were clients that were not happy with us. It was just a really tough time for someone that was brand new to the business to be engaging with clients and talking with people that were in their retirement, figuring out how they were going to try and use whatever funds they had left that hadn't been lost to be there for when they really needed it. Unfortunately, during that time, I couldn't survive as a financial advisor, monetarily speaking. So I decided that where a lot of the market was going at the time was people were looking for the guarantee. And we had some really good relationships with some of our annuity wholesalers. And I was able to find a job at Jackson National, being a annuity wholesaler on the variable fixed and index side. At the time, Jackson was like number 14 in the market. They went to number 3 after a lot of these insurance companies kind of fell by the wayside because of mispricing issues and whatnot. Jackson is a wholly owned subsidiary of Prudential PLC out in the UK. And during my time at Jackson, I found out about this global mobility program that Prudential offered. Applied for it, was accepted, and then that started my kind of global insurance journey, which was just unbelievable. So with that, I was able to take 3 different roles across the business in a variety of different functions as well as geographies. Mm-hmm. The first one that I worked on was in our Poland operation. We were doing a market entry into Poland. So I was in charge of setting up the agency distribution there, everything from recruitment, training, all the way to pricing and commissions. Then I did a role in an internal audit function in London. We were looking at all the risks of our business and how the different business units were mitigating them. I did an audit in our Malaysian business on some, we like to call it hanky-panky, that some of our agents were doing out there in terms of policy behavior. Found some issues, and the CEO at the time said, why don't you come out here and help us fix it? You're clearly not an auditor. You understand sales. So why don't you come out here and help us work on that?
And you got to live in Malaysia?
And I got to live in Malaysia. So I was in Kuala Lumpur for the last 4 years. I started as the head of strategy for our chief agency officer. We have 20,000 captive agents in the country, biggest agency force in the nation there. And then I was in charge of one of our distribution channels. I was running about 15% of the business, managing a relationship with one of our big banks. I had 70 sales staff across 30 branches in the country, and it's just phenomenal experience, unbelievable opportunities all around. But then sometime in 2016, I felt a few things were missing. One is I was missing home a lot. I had been away for quite some time. At that point, I'd been overseas for about 8 years.
Wow.
I'm originally from California, and I'd been away for about 17 years from California. Decided that maybe it was time to go home. And I was also just looking for something a little bit more. I wasn't sure what it was that I was really looking for, but I was looking for something a little bit more in my career progression. So I left my post there. I actually initially was taking a little bit of time off. And I've told the story before. I read this book called Thank You for Being Late by Thomas Friedman, where he talks about, have you guys read that?
No, I haven't, but I'm writing it down.
Okay. All right, cool. It's a great book. He talks about how three things are increasing at such a rapid pace that not only we as individuals can't adapt fast enough, but also our society at large is having a difficult time adapting to it. Number one is globalization. Number two is climate change. And number three is technology. And what I like about the book is he gives a kind of 50-year snapshot of what's happened over the last 50 years, how we've got to where we are today, and how Moore's Law is helping to increase that at such a crazy pace. And once I finished that book, my first thought was, my goodness, I need to get a job in technology. And it was more so from the fact that I really wanted to learn about all these emerging technologies that were part of our lives and just going to be part of our lives moving forward. We're not getting away from all these things that I'm sure we'll talk about throughout the podcast. And I just wanted to learn more about how they were going to impact us. So I started doing what anyone would do, is go to Google and look for jobs at Google. I couldn't find jobs that were interesting to me as a programmer or whatever it might be. And then I found out about this whole kind of Insurtech movement that was happening. An ex-colleague of mine from Prudential by the name of George Kesselman, who's the president and founder of Insurtech Asia, we met and he was telling me about Insurtech and what it means. And I said to myself, you know what, here's a great opportunity for me to learn about technology in a language I understand, which is insurance. So I've basically spent the last year and a half working with startups, working with carriers, working with VCs, working with accelerators, working with anyone and everyone in the ecosystem to really understand what are these technologies that are being used today, how do they apply to insurance and customers, and how will it shape the future of insurance on a macro level. So that's my very short answer to your question.
I love it. It's such a wonderful story. And I love the fact that you were able to kind of pause in between coming back to the States and just really honing in on what you wanted to focus on, and then being able to bring your technology background and fuse it with your insurance background. You had options, and it just sounds like, you drove right into the best thing that's going on in the industry. That's wonderful. So you have a lot of articles out there, and today we want to focus on one of the articles that you have and one of the focuses that you've worked on, which is for insurance carriers, insurance companies. They are looking to be innovative. A lot of them are just trying to get ahead of everything. A lot of them are fearful that maybe they're a little bit too late. But I would love to hear your practical guidance on how an insurance company can approach a startup. What do they need to do even before they start reaching out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if I take a step back before answering that question, I think innovation within insurance is not particularly new. Over the years, we've been implementing new technologies like OCR, DMS, new legacy systems, CRMs, right? I'm sure when CRMs came out, that was like such a brand new thing. Implementing Salesforce for our agency back in 2006 was like, wow. So I think there's always been some level of innovation within insurance and within every industry. What's happened now is I kind of think that a lot of this kind of movement, I'll call it, within Insurtech started around 2015. And I'm talking about just the specific word of Insurtech. And a lot of it started with Lemonade. aside from my feeling on the company and what they're doing, which I think they've done some great stuff, but they were really able to bring this whole notion of Insurtech to kind of mainstream, talking about what's wrong with insurance, what are people looking for in insurance. Now, again, I might not agree with all the messaging that they've done, but I think they've rolled out something really great. I think they've brought a topic to our industry and a conversation to our industry that needs to be had. And it's looking at all these really new technologies that are available and saying, how are we going to use this to enhance the customer experience? How are we going to develop something like an Amazon experience, like a Google experience, like an Apple experience? Because this day and age, if you look at how we operate our day-to-day lives, it all revolves, or a lot of it revolves around the technologies that we use every day. Right. So I'm using my iPhone, I'm using my computer, and it's all there, and it's all, we're so connected. And insurance is something where we help to protect all of those different aspects of life, right? So right down to from just our day-to-day commute all the way down to the actual technology, like the hardware devices, our phones that we use, right? So everything that we are experiencing in life needs, well, some can argue needs to be insured in some way, shape, or form. And I think what's happening now is insurance companies in using technology innovations, like I said, it's not new. But I think using technology innovations to develop an ecosystem and a way of life that allows people to not think that they're buying insurance and that they are just getting that coverage on the day-to-day aspects of their life. And not only getting the coverage, but also getting some value add from the organization that's actually providing that coverage is where we're trying to get to. So I mention that because I think that's the kind of mindset that insurance companies need to have. Right now, it's a lot of, okay, we need to be innovative. We need to go on the Insurtech movement. Let's open up an innovation lab. Let's set up a corporate venture fund. Let's do all these things. It's not so much about just playing ball in the Insurtech ball game. It's actually about how do we change fundamentally what we're doing to focus on what the customer really needs from us, and also be able to give them some more information to live healthier and better lifestyles. So going back to your question of what can carriers do, is I think the first thing that they need to do is really take a good hard look at what does their company offer and how do they want to be a part of their policyholders' lives. It's not so much, I've been part of technology transformations where they've said, okay, let's look at all of our current systems and see what needs to be replaced and what we don't have, and then let's put some stuff on top of that. That's kind of been innovation 101 for a lot of carriers and probably for a lot of corporates in other industries too. I think it's more around now, how am I shaping my business? How am I looking at what I'm actually offering there? And what is it that I actually want to do to be part of my customers' lives to help enhance their lives? And then once I figure that out, then what are the technologies that I need behind it? So that's kind of my first comment that I'd make on the question that you just asked, Arlene.
So what you're saying is we've kind of put the cart before the horse in the way that we are, at least the insurance industry is dealing with their clients, and they've got to be more customer centric. You first want to find out what that customer really wants before putting the technology to work behind it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I've, a great quote that one of my fellow Insurtech enthusiasts has been saying quite frequently. His name is Patrick Callahan. He works for H2M Forensic Market Strategists in somewhere in northern New York. I can't remember exactly where, but he often says, innovate from the customer backwards.
Yes.
And I think that I haven't found a quote that puts it more succinctly than that, right? To say, let's not look at, I've heard, someone was joking at this conference that I was at this last week saying that they were at an event and a couple of CIOs were up there saying, what have you done to be more innovative? Someone said, oh, well, we allow people to wear jeans on Fridays, or we allow people, we've put some ping pong tables in the break room, and, we're getting some data scientists on our team. And it's like, well, yeah, that's all great, but have you actually thought about what you're trying to do? What's the actual goal that you're trying to achieve? What's the end vision, and how does the customer play into it? Because ultimately, this business is around because of the policyholders that trust us to give us money to take care of them in times of need. That's the fundamentals of our business. And if we can't make sure that we're building something around that customer and around what they need and what they want, rather than what we think they need and what we think they want, the more that we can focus on that, that it's going to be for everyone. So I'd say the first thing that carriers need to do before engaging technology companies is figure out what is it you're trying to do and what is it that you're trying to achieve for your customer, and then start developing a plan after that. And I'm happy to go into some of that stuff too.
Yeah. And that's where technology comes in. That's, it allows you to more readily and more quickly be able to engage with your current customer base and start using some automation tools to query them and to just help them formulate to you what additional things do they need. And by doing so, then you're going to just improve that customer experience. Yeah, I definitely want to go into okay, so now they formulated what additional things their customer needs. Now they want to get an Insurtech involved. What's the next step?
So once they've understood what they're looking for, then they need to identify how are they going to go about it. So number one, are they going to try and build it themselves? So is it something that they've decided, all right, we need to do this initiative. We're going to implement this sort of technology because it helps to solve for X. Let's use that example, right? So let's say that now they've understood their needs. Need number one is X. Let's say whatever that X is in terms of the innovation initiative. So now they need to decide how they're going to achieve X. So one is they can build it themselves. They can hire some people that are going to build that technology. They can find a startup that they want to partner with and say, we're just going to pay you guys to do this for us, or they can go and buy a solution. So the next step going down that funnel, once they've decided their needs, is how do they want to go about it, and assessing which one of those paths they want to go down. Obviously, as you were kind of mentioning, Arlene, around the partnering with startups. So I won't talk about the building or buying because that's a whole other topic. But now if they want to partner with startups, then they need to take a hard look at how are we going to scout all these startups? There's so many startups out there. There's so many technology providers out there right now. How are we going to figure out which one that we want to go with? So they can either use external services that can help them with scouting the innovation landscape. So you have accelerators like Plug and Play and such they can pay a corporate subscription or an annual subscription. Plug and Play will do kind of all the innovation scouting for them. Some companies are building an innovation team to do the scouting. There's also services now, Innovator's Edge from Insurance Thought Leadership. They've now got a database that you can go into. If you want to go a more free approach, you can use Coverager, which can scan it. But now it's, how do I look at all these startups and then coming up with a framework for how you're going to assess it? And I think that whole framework and approvals process is probably the next layer of things that need to be looked at. Any one of us that have worked in the insurance industry know that approvals processes for a carrier take time. The number one complaint I hear from startups is they say, yeah, we have these great meetings, and then we don't hear from them for 6 months because they say they're trying to get all their internal approvals. That's something that's going to have to change as well. In that article that you mentioned, I talked about kind of building a quote unquote sandbox for startups to work in. Right. So you guys work in compliance area and licensing, so you must be familiar with a regulatory sandbox, even though we don't have a standard insurance one here in the States. I would like to argue that carriers should also create a sandbox environment for startups to work in. And that should not only be from a pilot perspective, but also from a approvals perspective as well, to identify, okay, we know that these technology companies are not going to be, especially some of the startup ones, are not going to be the IBMs and the SAPs of the world, right? So we shouldn't have to put them through the gauntlet like we would some of these bigger companies. We have to make sure we do our due diligence, but a lot of these technology startups, a lot of these insurtechs are running on a limited runway.
Right.
So, and they need that money. And it's not so much that they need it and they're desperate for it, but they need to keep their lights open too. So as part of that due diligence process, they need to make sure that the company they're working with is not just working with them to survive, right? They want to make sure that company's got traction, they have a good solution, that they are compliant, that they are secure, all that. But if a carrier is going to be very serious about doing some sort of implementation, they should not make that approvals process be a 3, 6, or 9 month process.
Right. And we're totally familiar with that because, a large insurance carrier is going to, just for an RFP, they might be asking for 3 years financials. They're going to be asking about all the cybersecurity that you have in place. And all of that stuff is quite daunting to a startup. It's stuff that they just don't have. And quite frankly, that they would just be like overwhelmed from the get-go. So I love the idea of having that sandbox where maybe it's a little bit more lenient to these startups to get involved and start collaborating with the senior management or the people that are kind of heading the innovation programs at the carriers. I love that.
Yeah, because look, the most of the time, or a lot of the time, these carriers are starting with a pilot. So they're going to be doing some of these innovation in a ring-fenced environment as it is already. And that's a real good time for them to do kind of that live due diligence, so to speak. And a carrier, again, they need to make sure they do their due diligence before they let a technology company into their doors. So there needs to be a fair amount of tire kicking to be done. They just need to be quick about it. And if they're going to say, yes, we are going to do this, be diligent about that approvals process. Don't make it sit on someone's desk for 2 months just because they had other things to do. Figure out a way to get that approvals process done and start a pilot. And when you're in that pilot, that's your opportunity to really say, okay, is this something that we really want to do and something that's going to really be meaningful for us? If yes, let's figure out a way to scale it up as quick as possible, as quick and securely as possible. If it's not something that's going to work, scrap it and move on. Don't be afraid to say, you know what, this didn't work. We spent $100,000 on a pilot. Let's find a new one. Because any experience, especially the ones that don't work out, are going to be the ones that we learn the most from.
Right.
Absolutely.
Always.
And I think it's also important to go in there from the carrier side, to go in there with clear guidelines and like meeting plans, like not just start up this pilot and then just have a hands-off approach, because that is so a quick way to just everything disintegrate. You have to have weekly meetings or daily, whatever it is, but you have to have a good guideline for this startup on how you're going to interact so that you can foster that relationship.
If companies are going to embrace innovation, if they're going to embrace doing things new, it has to be at a company-wide level. Everyone needs to know this is the vision, this is what we're trying to do, and make that alive. Right? Make that alive for all the employees so they can feel a part of it, right? If it's just something where it's like, yeah, we're going to do this stuff. It's going to be run by this innovation team. They're going to give us some cool stuff when it comes out, and then we'll let you know when the new stuff comes out. Then people aren't going to feel part of it. They're going to go, okay, management's doing something again, and they're so excited. They're doing their rah-rah. It's probably for their analysts or their board of directors or whatever it might be. We're just going to go and get on with our day-to-day. Right? But the more that people can get embraced with that technology, really know what a company's doing, and then have that permeate throughout the organization so all people are playing the same role, that's going to help the approvals process. That's going to help the pilot process. That's going to help the scaling up process, because then everyone's on the same boat. So I know I kind of jumped to a cultural aspect.
No, you need team buy-in, because that's where you're going to have a lot of resistance from people. People are always resistant to change. So if you get that buy-in, if you don't get that team working together, then you're going to have more of that resistance. So it just makes, I think, logical sense that you would really hone your message, get your people involved. It's more than just a rah-rah. You got to get, like you said earlier, that vision. so that everybody is looking forward to this change rather than, oh, it's more work. Oh, I got to do this. Oh, this is going to change. You got to get them rolling the same way.
Spot On is sponsored by Insurance Licensing Services of America. Need help with corporate name changes, annual returns, or surplus lines tax filings? Feeling overwhelmed? If you're looking for experts in regulatory compliance, you've come to the right place. ILSA provides the industry with over 50 services. To learn more about the company and how they can help, visit ilsainc.com.
I think the solution is also coming up with clear expectations at the very beginning, like, hey, Insurtech, this is your responsibility. This is what we expect from you on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. And the same thing from the insurance carrier side, because if you have that hands-off approach, it's going to be a recipe for disaster. And it's just like if I'm remodeling my house, I need to have clear expectations of what I want from my contractor. And hey, we're going to get together and go over things maybe on Wednesdays, on Fridays, we're going to have invoicing just so that both parties work well throughout the whole process. I think at the end, you just come up with a, really good outcome. So,
yeah. And if I may, just really quickly, one of the things to that exact point that I tell the startups that I work with, and even startups I don't work with, is one of the first questions they should be asking when they're meeting with a carrier, whoever the person is that they're meeting with in that first meeting, they should be saying, who is going to be measured by the success or failure of this initiative? And who's actually going to hold the specific KPI for the solution that we bring to you guys? And that's going to get carriers to think about this in a whole different light. So if they haven't thought about that already and they're not clear about it, the startup asking them will make them have to think about it, because then it's like, okay, actually, yeah, we're not just implementing a data analytics thing. We're not just implementing some blockchain solution. We're actually implementing something that's going to then translate to, number one, customer outcomes, but number two, my bonus or my salary or my employment at this company. So I think understanding that and then really drilling down to how can we help you to achieve that success metric that you're being measured on for this initiative is then going to put everyone on the same side of the table. So sorry, you had mentioned expectations. And I think knowing that expectation and again, what people are going to get measured on is a huge, huge thing for everyone to be aware of right at the start of the conversation.
Absolutely.
You talked earlier about some of the roles that you've had to play. Tell us about your role in bringing to the table two parties that perhaps have cultural and language barriers.
Yeah, that's always an interesting one. I think I've been a part this last year or so. I've been part of bringing a number of technology startups out to Asia. I think, and these are companies from US, Canada, and UK, and Germany most specifically. The number one thing I do is give them kind of a lay of the land of what's going on in that particular market. So we brought some of the same startups to both Japan and Singapore. Japan and Singapore have very, very different cultures in terms of personal behaviors, as well as the way business is done, as well as just the insurance kind of landscape out there. So I think the number one thing that needs to be done for technology companies that are going cross-culturally is they need to understand what it is they're getting themselves into. Likewise, carriers can't just say, you need to understand my business completely. They should also understand the nature of the technology companies and where they're coming from as well and how they've been able to implement in their local markets. I think that cultural bit is not only culture from a geographic perspective, but also from a business perspective in regards to the culture of an insurance company and the language that we use in an insurance company, loss ratios, FNOL, claims adjustments, and the language that's used with innovation or technology companies is completely different as well. So even if you bring two companies from the same geographical location together, there's still a lot of business cultural things that are awry there because they just don't speak the same language. They speak English, maybe if they're both in America, but they don't speak the same language in terms of what they're doing in their day to day. So I think the more, all of this really boils down to empathy, really understanding who you're meeting with on the other side of the table, what makes them tick, what makes them important, how are they operating their lives on a day-to-day basis. And then how can you tailor your message so that they can understand what you're trying to say? And how can you listen more to what they're telling you? So I'd say those are kind of the big things that I try and focus on.
I think a classic example of that is Novus, the car, and to the Spanish community, to the Latin community, it translates to doesn't go. So the car was a failure in the Latin countries because of the fact that
you're buying this car that just doesn't go.
Yeah, a car that doesn't go, nobody wants to buy. So it wasn't well thought out. Just that simple language failure to understand the words that they were using. And in English, I guess, a nova, a supernova, or everything else, you're thinking it's something grand. You're thinking you're doing this. But when it's translated over to another language, you really have to have people there that can actually speak that or understand that fully.
Right. And Stephen, just to go along with what you're saying, even though you might speak the same language, English, I know like even in our office, a team of 65, when we have people that are speaking to our clients and our people have all these acronyms. They're talking about AOI and all these different acronyms, DOI and DOR. And I'm like, you have to break it down. They don't know that SOS is the Secretary of State and DOR is the Department of Revenue. CQ is a corporate qualification. They have like this own little language. And, when we hire new people are like, what the heck? What are they talking about? So that's just within our own little world of regulatory compliance. Never mind when you're trying to put together a techie with a traditional insurance carrier, that's totally two different languages. So definitely they need to have that bridge, someone that can just put them together and break it down.
Sometimes I play that role where I just sit there and I'll listen to both sides talk and I'll be like, okay, you realize this person's saying this to you, this person's saying this to you. Let's answer in a way. If you don't know how to answer in their language, just tell me how you would answer in yours and I'll be your translator for you.
That's great.
Great. Have you had to learn other languages as a result of all your travels, or are you fluent in any other languages?
Unfortunately, I'm quite embarrassed to say no, I'm not fluent in any other language. I learned when I was in Poland, I learned just some day-to-day words. When I was in Malaysia, I'd say I probably learned about a good 50 different phrases there. I was there for quite a long time and I worked with salespeople. So salespeople have a lot of slang, they have a lot of things. And when I'd hear something being said more than once, I'd ask some of my colleagues, hey, what does that mean? My favorite one that I used to hear, which was probably like in my first 6 months, I kept on hearing people say Bay Tahan. And they'd say Bay Tahan every time they talk to me. And I was like, what the heck is this? And then like some people would chuckle and whatever. Then I realized that Bay Tahan is I can't stand this. Like, I can't stand this guy. I can't stand you.
That's not nice.
So I was like, oh, okay. Well, I guess I'm not doing the right thing then. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Whoa.
But yeah.
Learning experiences.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about the future. What do you see in the pipeline?
With myself, so I've recently relaunched my own business, which is Pivot Ventures US. Initially, I was working with my colleague George my ex-colleague from Prudential, George in Singapore. He had both of these businesses. One was Pivot Ventures, one was Insurtech Asia. He earlier this year launched his own startup, and I decided to take on the Pivot name and launch it here in the US. And throughout all the conversations that I've been having over the last year and a half, throughout all the engagements, most of my number one finding was exactly what we've been talking about for the last hour here, is that a lot of these startups need help in communicating that message of what it is that they're offering and how they can help carriers. So my focus has really been on sales strategies, business development consulting, go-to-market initiatives. Sometimes I do marketing reviews. I'm not a digital content person by any means, but I'll take a look at their brochures, their pitch decks, their websites, and say, what is it that you're communicating? What is it that you're trying to communicate? And is that message actually getting across? So that's where my focus has been. I have an affinity to working with startups. Obviously, by nature of that, I work with carriers. But in terms of the clients that I like to focus on, it's on the startup side. That's where I see myself continuing for the foreseeable future. Now, in terms of I think you were about to ask me the future of the industry, Ted, is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I'd say future of the industry, I was at a conference earlier this year in April called the Global Insurance Symposium. And it was in Des Moines. And the first person that spoke was Dr. Robin Shara, who I think you guys have had on your show.
Yes.
Yeah, we just talked with him a few days ago.
Oh, okay, great. So he gave this presentation. He was talking about insurance disruption. He was talking about all these things. And one of the things that, obviously with his digital scouting, he's quite keen on content. And he ended with saying, and maybe he mentioned this on your show too. So, maybe talking about something that he already talked about. He's like, don't love product, love your customers. And he gave this example of, how his friend just had a baby. And the first person, Robin asked him, who did you ask for advice about your baby? And his friend said, I asked my parents, I asked my friends, and I asked Google. And he looked back at him, he looked back at him, and he said, well, did you ask your insurer? And the guy looked at him like he was crazy. Like, why the heck would I ask my insurance company about how to raise a baby? And he replied to him by saying, look, these guys have been dealing with claims for babies and pregnancies for such a long time. They have so much data on how to take care of babies, which are the best strollers to buy, which are the best facilities to go to, what's the best milk to feed them. If you look at it from a wider standpoint, insurance companies know about accident mitigation and how to best get your car back on the road quickly, how to rebuild a home because they're working with contractors, how to assess buildings because they have to look at how they're going to insure a commercial property. Why do I mention all this? Because the nature of the game for the moment, we're changing right now, but the nature of the game historically has been customer pays a premium, insurance company pays a claim and coordinates all the I like to call it providers of care, whether it's doctors, adjusters, contractors, or the like.
Right.
Now it's going to be more about how do I help my customers and my clients and my policyholders actually live better lives. So if I'm insuring them for their life, how can I give them free content? And that was a very big point of Robin's. How do I give them free content, free information, free knowledge that will allow them to live healthier lifestyles? If I'm insuring a car, how do I make sure that they can drive better? If I'm insuring their home, how do I make sure that they don't have a pipe burst that's going to cost them all this money? So I think insurance is going to be not just about providing a product, but also a ongoing service and ongoing value add to customers. And, one of the things that he mentioned kind of wrapping up his keynote was he said, we want to get in the hearts, minds, and home screens of our customers.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree more, because if I know, right, so my daily routine is like I go on my Apple News, I go on Business Insider, I go on a couple other news sites, Wall Street Journal, Economist. Those are kind of like my go-to places to read information on. Then, as he said, if I have an issue, the first thing I do is go to Google. The last thing I would ever think about is go to my insurance company, unless it has to do with a claim that I'm getting paid.
That is
Right.
correct. Yes.
So we need to change that dynamic. And it's going to take a long, I don't want to say long time, but it's going to take a lot of mindset to let people know, hey, you know what, you're right. I am going to go to my insurance company for these information. I am going to look at my insurance company's website 3 times a day or 3 times a week because they give me valuable information on my life. And they're doing it for the sake of me, not for the sake of them trying to sell me a new policy. So I think that's going to be the first kind of change. The second is around this concept of embedded insurance. And I guess it kind of goes hand in hand with that first concept, but it's around how do we offer insurance at the time that a customer is going to need it. Right. So someone gave the example of Apple Care. When you buy an iPhone, and then all of a sudden you're about to spend $800,000, $900,000 bucks. And then they go, by the way, do you want Apple Care for 3 years for $80?
Right.
Here's the benefits of Apple Care. And here's why you should have it. Well, you know what? If I've just spent $1,000 on a phone and you're telling me $80 is going to make sure that if I drop that phone, if anything happens, you're going to give me a new one.
Right.
Okay. I see the value. and I see the need. So we're now seeing how with a lot of these like online startups, right, the companies that are launching either MGAs or full stack, look at the partnerships that Lemonade has been doing over the last few months. Look at the partnerships that Hippo has been doing. You know, Matic Insurance out here in Los Angeles, they partner up with mortgage companies directly. And that's just on the renters and home insurance side. But that shows that the more that you can have those product offerings, if you're looking at it from a product perspective, showing to the customers exactly when they need it. Kind of like with Amazon, right? I buy something and then they say, oh, by the way, because you're buying this, you probably need these 3 other things too.
Right. We actually have a client, Karin Soroya from Cover, that, let's say you just purchased a piano today on your American Express card, and then you get a notification, hey, would you like to insure that? Take a picture and get it insured. So that's where we are right now, and I know that the industry is going through a shakeup, but at the end of it, it's going to be a much better product, for everyone. So it's a long time coming, but it's needed and I love it.
Yeah. And right now, I think we're in the middle of that shift because with SEO and with, a lot of these different ways to manage online platforms, it's really easy to like embed your insurance at that point of, I'll say point of sale or point of whatever time that person might need that insurance. The problem is right now is insurance is still seen as like this kind of necessary evil stroke grudge purchase stroke product that people are not so sure about. So I think that even though we're seeing more of it embedded now, I think until we can start shifting the needle or moving the needle on the cultural aspect and the services aspect that I mentioned earlier, then people are going to start being more and more tuned to, yes, I actually see this company providing value for me more so than just trying to sell me a product. And that's going to want me to have them be part of my lives even more. And we see that in a lot of the emerging economies like Africa. If you look at like Bima or micro-insure, a lot of the policies that they are offering to consumers out there are very simple. They're needs-based. They cost sometimes a fraction of dollar, a couple pennies, or even free, just to let people know, hey, this is what you're getting with insurance. This is how it all works, getting them familiarized with it, showing them how it fits into their overall need, and then introducing other products and services. So in some ways, the developed markets actually are going to have a tougher time in getting this kind of cultural shift because people in the United States, UK, Germany, they've been dealing with insurance for ages, and we know what insurance is all about, and there's a lot of negative perceptions with it. The emerging markets, a lot of these consumers have never even experienced insurance before. So when you give it to them and you show them what the value is, that's almost a leg up to some of these developed markets because they can kind of train their new consumers around the values of insurance rather than having preconceived notions about insurance like a lot of the consumers that we see in the States and UK or Germany might already have.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? You're drawing a really good picture for the future of insurance. So thank you for that. For someone in our circle of insurance professionals, what advice can you share with someone that's just entering the industry and preparing for their future?
I'd say understand the fundamentals. So we've been talking a lot about technology. We've been talking about innovation. Someone that's coming into this industry, ultimately, businesses go around dollars and cents, right? It's all about your profit and loss. People that are coming into the industry need to understand where money flows. So if a customer gives us $1, where does that dollar actually go? And how does that then drive the overall operations of the company? That is going to give them the best way to really understand why all these parts are there and why they're all working in the way that they're working. And I think knowing that and then spending time understanding how operations teams work, so how claims get paid out, how contracts are serviced, how amendments are done, spending time with the sales and marketing teams around how products are actually sold and how they're positioned to customers. And then also spending time, as much as it can be painful, with the actuaries in terms of how pricing works and how reserving works. And then obviously spending time with the risk and compliance people to understand what are the risks that are there and how do they actually mitigate them. So I've had a very fortunate experience in my career that I've been able to get involved in all of these different areas in some way, shape, or form. And when I started with just sales, I felt like I didn't really know a lot about the other parts of the business until my CEO in Poland told me, he's like, mate, you've been selling these things and you've been dealing with operations people for your whole career. You know more than half the people in this room, right? Just by being a salesperson. But that was only half the story. Once I actually sat down with the actuaries and understood how pricing was done, and sat down with the CFO and understand where the dollars go and why we needed to have this element of reserving and why we needed to have this thing and that thing and so forth. And then sitting down with the risk people. I mean, my 1 year in internal audit was probably the most boring time of my career, but I learned so much about putting control and testing matrices into place and, doing sample size audits of just going one after another, just trying to look at things, because all of these things work in unison. It's not just about products and technology and services. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes. So I think people that are coming into this industry really need to have a mindset that they want to learn all about what our industry offers and why it offers, because we're going to see a lot of people that start retiring within our industry. And that knowledge of how we've been able to run the business for hundreds of years, right? You don't run a business for hundreds of years without proper risk management, without proper capital reserving. So unless people understand and that knowledge is passed down about how these companies have been able to survive for so long, and people don't have that willingness to understand that, then as long as they can continue to understand that, they can pass down that information, they can learn that information, that's what's going to allow our industry to strive in the future.
And the other thing is, not everyone would be as fortunate as you have been to perhaps getting your hands-on cross-training in the actuarial department, in sales. But I would share with people that there's so many ways now to learn more. Reading blogs, you can go in there and just read blogs from actuaries, listen to podcasts. There's so many ways to further educate yourself and get a great understanding of all the different components that make up this insurance industry. So that's out there for everyone to just consume.
Before we close our interview, I want to inform our circle of professionals that next week we will be interviewing Nicholas Gregory, who works as counsel at Aiken Gump. He advises Insurtechs and other companies on business and regulatory issues, with a particular focus on the intersection of insurance and technology. He's handled matters in state and federal courts across the country and has extensive courtroom and trial experience, including first chairing numerous jury trials to verdict. I guarantee it's going to be worth your time. That's next week on Spot on Insurance, episode 67. Arlene, take us home.
Stephen, you have given us so much valuable information today. If someone wants to connect with you, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn at smgold is my handle, or my email is Stephen with a PH, STEPHEN at pivotventures.us.
Very, very good. Thank you so much, Stephen, for your time today. Ted and I really, really appreciate you having come on.
Thank you for having me.
Visit spotoninsurance.com, where you'll discover an ever-growing library of podcasts, videos, articles, and online tools by professionals for professionals to enhance your insurance education. By the way, that's where you'll also find our podcast notes and bonus resources. Please don't forget to click the iTunes link to rate and review, and let others know what you think of Spot On Insurance. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.